Welcome back to Tasty History Tidbits. I'm your host, Professor A, and today we're going to be making a very simple and quick recipe that is inspired by colonial recipes here in the United States. In fact, thank you to Colonial Williamsburg for giving me the idea to update this, and the dish is quite simply taking advantage of a new world food that is in the belladonna family, and it's just simply tomato and eggs. So let's get started. So for this recipe, it's a very simple one, and thanks to Colonial Williamsburg for giving me the idea to make this recipe and update it. So you're just going to need an egg. I have 3 eggs and a tomato. Can't forget tomatoes if it's the key ingredient. And then also because, like I said, we're just taking inspiration from this original colonial recipe, I'm adding some bell pepper, some green onion, and because cheese is popular in my house, some cheese, and then you're going to need butter to cook it. Butter, in fact, is one of the keys to nice, fluffy eggs. So once you have all your ingredients assembled, you're just going to start cracking your eggs. And the interesting thing about this dish is that it can actually be enjoyed at any time. We have come to think of eggs as a breakfast food, but in previous history, eggs wouldn't have just been a breakfast food. It would have been an anytime food. In fact, in colonial America, breakfast usually consisted of something light, like maybe a piece of bread and some eggs, or you could have bread and cheese, bread and meat. So it wasn't just something that was strictly like just, we're going to eat eggs, bacon, toast. That was not a thing for most people, and they would probably have it when they had guests over, but for the most part they tried to keep things simple. And if you're really interested in learning more about that, Townsend's does a great series on what people ate for different meals of the day. So he's got a video on breakfast, he's got one on supper, he's got one on dinner, which would have been lunch, and I highly recommend checking out those videos. So now that we have our eggs in the dish, I am going to take my immersion blender. You can use a whisk, but the key to making sure that your scrambled eggs turn out really well scrambled is to obviously use your immersion blender or a whisk and beat them really, really well until it's all one thing. You don't have to worry about adding milk to it or water. I know some of our grandmothers used to add milk to it, and that is because during the Depression, to make things stretch, they would use milk, but you can just whip eggs. So once your eggs are mixed, they should be like this, nice and frothy, foamy, they're really well incorporated. And we're going to put those aside for just a minute. I'm actually using a hot plate today, so I'm actually turning it on to low heat, just so that way it warms up. And while that's warming up a little bit, we're going to start cutting our tomato. Again, when you're cutting, remember to always protect your fingers, tuck them. So I'm going to dice my tomato. In the original recipe, it doesn't actually say how to do it. They just say cut the tomato. So you could cut it into chunks or things like that, but I prefer diced tomatoes. And it's okay if it's a little messy. Another thing I should point out, though, is that it would have been very uncommon to eat tomatoes not cooked in some way, shape, or form, because, believe it or not, at one point people thought things like tomatoes and potatoes were poisonous. There's also more practical reasons for why a lot of foods might have been served cooked, or at least having gone through some sort of like sauteing or something like that. And that's because you had a lot of issues with contamination, like in soil and water, and so people could get sick if they didn't cook things. And part of that was because of, just the proximity of waste or sewage to rivers and streams, or maybe even where land was. So we have these cut up. We're going to put them aside. Now we're going to start cooking on our eggs. So I'm going to move this out of the way, bring my hot pot over, or not my hot pot, my hot plate I'm really craving hot pot. I love hot pot. So I have 2 pans. And one thing I've noticed is that my eggs turn out better when I use these ceramic coated pans. But you can use any pan you want. So we're going to put the eggs on the bigger one. This one, I'll show you what we're doing with it in just a second. So to really get it started, because you want to give your eggs enough slippage, we're just going to put some butter in the pan. And we're going to do that on both sides because I am going to be using the other side. It'd be helpful if I had the pan there. My brain turned off for a second. Because we're going to be using the other side to make our toast. So we're just going to let this go. And because this is not actually a flame, it's going to take a few minutes. So while that's going, we're going to use the magic of YouTube to cut.
The tomato's introduction to colonial Virginia is thanks to a man named João de Sequeira, who eventually changed his name to John. He was a Portuguese physician who came to Virginia in the 1700s, approximately around 1741. It was thanks to John de Sequeira that people began to view the tomato as an edible fruit. Thomas Jefferson himself confirms that in his writings. The recipe that we're cooking from is not of Virginia colonial origins. It's actually from Spanish origins.
Through the magic of YouTube, we've already started sauteing our bell peppers. The goal is not to make them translucent like you would in most dishes because we still want that nice crunch and that nice texture, but we just want to soften them a little bit, especially if you have little ones who might be eating this. They may not be used to eating it, but we want that nice crunch. And because this is a colonial inspired recipe, and they probably wouldn't have eaten a lot of their vegetables raw like we do today, I'm going to add my tomatoes in just to kind of get all that flavor mixed in together, and then a few of my green onions. And the goal is not to like cook all the flavor out or to cook the colors out or to make it translucent. It's literally just to soften the bell peppers, kind of marry your ingredients together. And we're going to add some salt. And some pepper. You can add other seasonings if you want to, but I wanted to keep this recipe very simple. Okay, and when that's done sufficiently for you, you're going to just take a little plate or something or a bowl, and you're just going to set it aside. So once that's done, you're going to clean and wash your pans, and then you're going to put more butter in it. But while we're waiting for the butter to melt and get ready for our eggs, I am starting the toast. So let's just put a tiny bit of butter in here. You don't really need a lot of butter, just enough to coat the bottom of the pan so your eggs don't stick. And over here, we're just going to start making our toast in the pan. So make sure that that pan is nice and hot before you start putting the toast in there. The nice thing about using it this way is that it's going to give you nice brown, nice crisp. So we're just going to move our butter around so our eggs don't stick. Just make sure it's nice and coated. It's nothing worse than eggs sticking. Well, cheese. Cheese is worse. I'll give cheese the credit there. All right. So once it's nice and coated, we're just going to take our eggs and we're going to dump them in the pan. Remember, make sure it's on lower heat. The reason why is because you don't want your eggs to burn. So we're just going to give it a minute to settle in there. And then it'll get cooking. And then meanwhile, we're just going to keep on our bread. And I'll see you in just a second once these eggs really get started cooking. Okay. And the key to making sure that your eggs are fluffy and not burnt is to keep moving them. You want to give them like a couple seconds in the pan to just start heating up. But for the most part, after that, you can just start moving them, and that'll make sure that your eggs are nice and fluffy without burning. Eggs don't like to be left alone. They're kind of finicky that way. All right, so now we're going to turn the heat off because the eggs are mostly cooked, and we're just going to let the residual heat cook them. And while the residual heat is cooking in them, we're going to add our cheese so it can get in there and melt. It is really important that you do not leave them on the heat at this point because they will overcook and they will just be not very good. Okay, now that that's nicely incorporated, we're going to set this aside and we're going to work on our bread. Let it cool down. I happen to have very nice granite countertops that can take the heat. So we're just going to turn our toast over. Ooh, this color is perfect. Look at this color. Nice and golden brown. So you want the other side to look like that. Add a little bit more butter if you feel you need to do that. And now we just wait for our bread to be nicely toasted. And the toast should be done. Beautiful golden brown coloring. And so now that these are done, let's go ahead and get it plated. And here's your final result. We just topped it with that tomato mixture that we made. And I added some hot sauce. You can add what you want, a little bit of salt and pepper. Doesn't that look yummy? And I even made you some. So let's give it a try. Yeah, this is definitely the lightness and refreshing bit of the tomato because we didn't overcook it. We didn't cook it with the eggs. We just warmed it with the bell pepper, the onions. It's very, very simple. It doesn't have a whole lot of complexity to it because there's just not a lot of seasonings in it. It's really just letting the ingredients shine on their own. And it's just so refreshing without being heavy. Let's give our toast a try. Mmm. Mmm. Nice, crunchy texture. I topped mine with a little bit of strawberry jam. You can top yours with whatever you want or eat it plain. But this is definitely a winner. This is a great redo update on this dish. This is a very simple dish. This is something that doesn't take that long to cook. And I hope that you try it. So if you do decide to try it and make your own version of this dish, please go ahead and snap some shots, post them to your Instagram, and tag at Tasty History Tidbits. And I will see you in the next one. Have a great rest of your day.